we're going to be using throughout the day a polling process so that we can get some quantifiable results and have a little bit of data about who is participating in this meeting, not only the people here in the room, but a way to also involve our webcast audience. And we'll use these questions that are built from the survey that we've been doing to help provide some data, as I said, and also to be a discussion point for a discussion that will move around the room. There are two ways for you to participate in the polling, and I'm going to ask Eric to put up the first question. You can go log on to a website on your smartphone or your other device, poll everywhere/awake, or you can text on your smartphone. And there we go. So we're going to do a fun one that everybody can take part in. It has nothing to do with the content of the meeting, but just to give you a sense of how you work your phone or your device to participate in this. So you can see the URL is pollev.com/awake, or you can text awake to the number there, and then you get to choose one of these 5 answers. So what's your favorite part of the upcoming 4th of July holiday? Fireworks, picnics, patriotic displays, parades, or just having a day off from work or school? And you can also see the results in the bottom right-hand corner up there to see. Is everybody getting the hang of this? I see people getting their devices out. Usually we say put your devices away and pay attention to the meeting, but this one you get permission to actually have your device out and make use of it. All right, that's a good test case. Let's do a real poll. Eric, can we have the second poll, please? Now, this one is asking a question about which of these apply to you? And we'll invite the patients, the family members, the caregivers here with us today to participate in this poll and give us a sense of who is in the room and also who is joining us by webcast, so that as we go through the day, we'll have a better sense of everyone's relationship to sleep apnea. And after Dr. Burson's talk, maybe more of us need to move to the tables with the white tablecloths than we might have thought in being patients or suspected patients. Great. So while those results are filling in, we've got this first panel, and we're going to have 2 panels today. This first group of folks is going to build on Dr. Burson's overview, and they're going to focus on the symptoms of sleep apnea, the impact of those symptoms on their lives, and their journeys to diagnosis. We're really fortunate to have found through the survey outreach that we're doing someone who's very newly diagnosed, and then we have folks who've had a lot longer experience with the condition and managing it. The members of our first panel, and I'm not going to tell you which ones they are, we've got a former mayor, an MIT valedictorian, a nationally ranked triathlete, an aggressive social worker, and a television industry executive. And they come from really all parts of the country. And we've asked each of them just to share a piece of their journey as a means to kick off the conversation that we'll have over the next hour or so. And they'll forgive me in advance if I give a little sign like keep moving along so that we can get to the bigger conversation. And first I'd like to introduce San Juanita Sanchez from McAllen, Texas, San Juan, Texas. The southernmost part of Texas, I understand.
This is correct.
Yeah, she's going to share a bit of her journey. Then we'll hear from Peter Stein from the upper coast of Maine, Paul Zuccarini from Key Biscayne, Florida, Eugenia Brooks of Brooklyn, New York, and Joelle Dubrow from Los Angeles will wrap us up. So, San Juanita, please.
Thank you. I'd like to, first of all, thank you all for the opportunity to share my story. To give a little bit of way of background, who I am and where I come from. I am the youngest of 10. I am a first generation in the United States. My parents were immigrants. I was a migrant worker, but I did go to school. I am an attorney by profession, and I was the mayor of my city for 9 years. I was too busy to ever think there was something wrong. And I can tell you that I've just been diagnosed on March 20th with my first visit with a doctor. 8 days later, I realized that I had been sleeping or having sleep apnea for probably longer than I ever imagined. My mother had a saying, and it was, "El sueño es la vida," sleep is life. I didn't realize just how true that was until I started learning, and I'm still learning, of how this has affected me and has affected me definitely and continues. So I stopped being mayor, and I thought that maybe my stress level and hypertension had to do with that stress. And I'm sure it did. But I also took time now to start seeing other things that were happening. And as a practicing solo attorney, I'm the one that takes care of all the folks that come in through my office. I start realizing that from the time, and you know how you have a time span, my life before and my life after? Mine was not being in public service, but having a little bit more time. I start realizing how tired I was feeling. I start realizing that I was starting to sleep while I was doing interviews of my clients, and I didn't realize what I had just told them. And as a lawyer, that's a scary thought. I started going to court and realizing I couldn't think what the name of that objection was because it wouldn't come to mind. I was driving home and I was at a stoplight and I fell and I actually had a dream. And I didn't realize how long I'd been there. I would wake up, and it was around February of this year that I woke up and I told my family, my sister in particular this morning, I said, "I'm dying." And she said, "Why are you saying this?" I said, "I don't know. It's this instinct feeling that I have right here," is the only thing I could say. I said, "I'm dying." There was nothing. I was on hypertension medication, and actually my blood pressure started getting normal. But there was still something else going on. And I have a great family that gathers to pray. And I said, this is how it was diagnosed. I was the one at the table asleep during prayer. And I felt, well, it's just because of the mantra and all that kind of just sleeping. Didn't realize that I had a family member who was a doctor. And they took me aside and they said to me, "There's something going on. It is not normal how you just sleep." I said, "Well, it's a Sunday and this is the only time I take naps," which wasn't true because I was starting to come home for lunch and take 2-hour naps. I would wake up and have my coffee, and I could not go to wake up. I had to sleep for another hour before I really got my day going. And that was affecting my practice because I couldn't stay at the office. And he said to me, "We believe that you have sleep apnea." And he began to explain a little bit of what that is. He made my doctor's appointment, and he gave me the first monies to make sure I got it done. I did go, and what I realized was I did a home study, and I came back, and a couple of days, they told me the look was, they looked at the monitor and the results of their computer, and they looked at me, and they looked back, and they looked at me, and I realized something's going on. And they said, "You're very severe." I had 83 episodes in 1 hour for an average of 19 seconds. And we need to do something for you. So they were seeing I got scheduled for an overnight study. And I just remember going home after that visit, and I was told I was very severe, but I wasn't told what else was I going to do. My sleep study overnight was going to be about 6 weeks later. And as a good lawyer, I went to my computer and I sent a message to my doctor. And I said, "Okay, you've just diagnosed me. I am very severe, but no one's told me what happens. Can you tell me what we need to do to prevent a mishap?" 15 minutes later, I was called that there was a cancellation and I could come in that night. But how many patients know to do that? How many I don't know what to ask, and I'm learning here today. I did go in, but the next challenge was because I, unfortunately, do not have insurance. I'm private pay. And I asked when I walked out of that sleep study that I would need a machine. And I said, "Well, what do I need to do to get that?" Well, the machine that we can give you is the $800 one. And I said, "That's the one with the humidifier," because I knew there were some. He said, "Oh, no, those are more. But the one that you can get is the $800. And I said, "Okay, well, that means I need to wait a few months because I got to build up for that." And I just remember thinking, but don't I need that? And it's like, it's available to you, but you have to purchase it. And so there was another dilemma walking out, like, how am I going to do this quicker? I said, if I can get a few more wheels to come in, if I can go, you think about what you have to do, but I knew I could get to it. It would just take me a little bit longer. The next thing I know is I did ask when I went to my follow-up with the doctor, and I asked, is there any other assistance in this? So there's a foundation that can allow you to have a machine for $100 and will help you file that application. But I had to know to ask. And thank God, still took a little while to get it, but I got my machine. And it's really incredible that you don't know that you're not sleeping well until you do sleep well. Because I had a different normal. And once I started sleeping well, the next day I was able to not nap. I was able to talk to my family. I was able to sit through an entire interview of a client without watching them look at me like, what is going on? And I am still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, what I'm supposed to ask. My next follow-up with my doctor is not until July. So it's those long gaps between us getting the attention that we need that I do worry. I worry as a leader in a community with our folks who may not have the financial ability to be able to take care of the situation. And I changed my life as soon as I've started learning. I've changed the way that I eat. I am now enrolled in a gym. I'm doing everything possible to help myself stay healthy, but also to be able to provide hopefully inspiration to others as I go through this journey, trying to find out what my new normal is going to be and what do I need to do. So I continue to learn from fellow panelists and being here, and I hope that this is just the beginning of many series that we can have these dialogues throughout our communities and with people who may look at us in the same situation and realize, you know, there's something that we need to take care of and something can be done. Thank you.
My turn. My name is Peter Stein. I grew up in the Boston area, and I currently live in Portland, Maine. I come with a pedigree. I received a PhD from MIT in the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in 1986 in the field of underwater sound, or sonar system development is actually my forte. And around 1992, I started my own company called Scientific Solutions out of Nashua, New Hampshire. Lived there for about 30 years. And, you know, it's stressful running a small business, and it's stressful keeping things going, and stressful and stressful and stressful. And you grow older. I met my wife when she was 18 and I was 20. And over the years, she said, you know, you hold your breath when you sleep. You stop breathing. Constantly would tell me that you don't sleep well. And then as the years went on, it would get worse. And I think that does happen as you get older and things start to relax and so forth. So, you know, we're led to the disaster of the last year. The company was doing great until around 2000. We were developing technology for the detection of underwater drones in a harbor, which is obviously an important national security interest. People think about drones in the air. Well, there was one underwater, and they're actually a pretty big threat. I pushed hard from about 2010 to about last year to start a big project. And a year ago, the project was taking hold. And I also got myself involved in some other work trying to save a ski area in northern New England. That's another story. But the bottom line was I ended up about a year ago, a little bit more, maybe about 14, 15 months ago, with 2 full-time jobs and an unbelievable amount of stress and sleepiness and so forth. And I believe that the combination of stress and sleep apnea is deadly. What happens is simple. It wakes you up. You know, eventually you hold your breath, you become mentally ill anyways, and it wakes you up. And it causes you to not fall back asleep. Your mind starts churning again, you don't sleep. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't sleeping for years, months, and in the end, very little at all. And the mental illness that ensued was incredible. You know, I was never a firm believer in mental illness. I'm a believer now. My mind was broke. I went manic. It was a clean manic episode. I would have these things called microsleeps. I never knew that a thing called microsleep was, but I would be standing there, and I can remember one in front of the kitchen counter, and I'd feel my knees droop Everything in my body just drooped for a minute. I went to sleep for a microsecond and went to the doctors, started seeing doctors. My family was going, you're manic, you need to go see doctors. So you start seeing psychologists and psychiatrists, and everybody starts pushing at you, and you become more mentally ill. You become more stressful because it feels like your world's collapsing, and all of a sudden you're seeing doctors, and I'm amazed that the first thing the doctor didn't pull off was sleep apnea. I'm just amazed. They had me starting to go through series of tests. So, the world started crumbling apart, and I don't want to go into the details of it, but it was bad enough that my security clearance needed to get pulled. I had a top secret security clearance. The security clearance was pulled because that's the right thing to do when somebody goes mentally ill. You shouldn't be running around with a top secret security clearance. It's fairly justifiable. And the results of that were everything started collapsing. Everything started falling apart. Everything started losing control. It was worse and worse and worse until about 2 months later, they had me seeing tests. I was literally driving to a stress test that I was late for to try to see if a stress test was causing these microsleeps. When I was on a windy road in Maine, I came around the corner, roughly 60 miles an hour. I had been saying to myself, you need to stop and take a nap, because I would do that frequently. I'd always be taking naps. You need to stop and take a nap. You need to take a nap. I didn't stop. The next thing I heard was the bang, where I had hit a minivan that was also going about 60 miles an hour coming around the other way. We just clipped left sides. Everybody walked away from that accident. The fireman said, it's rare that I see it come out this good. That woke everybody up. And then they did schedule an emergency sleep study. I think that that's a miserable experience. I'm not sure why, because I think that there's far easier ways to tell whether somebody's, holding their breath at night besides having to go through that. I described it to people as it's like sleeping in a tool closet, probably it took a while even after that to get the machine, and the cost of the machine and the pain. They wanted to do it after they said, oh, you have sleep apnea, now you got to come in and get another sleep study so we can set the machine. And I said, why? I have it. Just give me the machine. And it was clear that it's sort of, you have to come in. And then I went in, and it was so miserable that I just went home after about 20 minutes. And they said, well, you put you on the machine, it made it better. I said, what else do we need to know? And I didn't go in, and then I got a call saying the insurance company was going to refuse me, and I went to the doctor, and he gave me the machine finally. It was an onerous experience to get the machine, the cost of the machines. This is a prevalent disease, and it is linked to mental illness. I can guarantee you, I'm a scientist and an engineer. I base my things on my conclusions on facts and what I see around me, and especially on what I experience. I am so pleased that this is being pulled together, that this is a first of meeting. I implore the people that in D.C. that are with the FDA, that come to D.C. in order to make a difference. Make a difference. This should be much higher on the list of possibilities of why you're nuts, why you have a mental illness. I'm about 10 months out now of using the machine, and my wife says she's never seen me so calm, never known me to be this calm. I believe in mental illness. I can believe you can be cured from it. I think that this disease plays a significant role in it and in our society. That's my spiel.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. My name is Paul Zuccarini. Listening to the two panelists that spoke before me, I can see we all are facing different challenges with sleep apnea. I'm glad that you're making progress. That's tremendous to hear. Some people, and I don't call myself this, some people might say, I'm tough. Not sure what that means, since my mother still calls me Paulie. So I'm going to start my conversation that perhaps I'm subtly different than some sleep apnea patients. I've written a little list down here. I have a school record in the decathlon, which is a track and field event. I'm a national champion triathlete. I played collegiate soccer. And I think I bring that type of stuff up just to let you know that sleep apnea can affect anyone, regardless if you're physically fit or not. And then Adam reminded me something last night that people are getting a chuckle out of. I coincidentally can hold my breath for over 5 minutes. So, I had a doctor friend tell me some time ago, said, with this sleep apnea, no wonder you can hold your breath so long. You're probably training at night. And apparently there's merit to it. Now, I'm not sure it's that good for you, but when Kim was saying, or one of the panelists were saying, hold your breath for 6 seconds, and say, I can do that. But what I'm getting to is that it can happen to anyone. And back in 2013, I'm assuming I had sleep apnea well before that. People just kept, whether we going camping or my wife at the time or girlfriend after my wife was no longer in the picture, kept telling me I'm not breathing. I said, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry I'm snoring. I don't want to wake you up. But finally someone convinced me to go to the sleep study, and I can't match Adam's numbers of 150, but they told me 56, and I don't know what 56 meant, 56 something. So I think in my case it was fortunate. I got the sleep apnea machine right away, and immediately I felt better, literally that week. So I figured that for years, I guess that was impacting me. So I'm happy about it now. And a lesser stage, or a lesser situation, is that after I got the machine, most recently being that I'm in essentially Miami, Florida, I had to deal with a hurricane. So you've got to be prepared. If you got a sleep apnea machine, you lose power. So if you like to use them and it benefits you, be prepared for that. And Adam has some good information that he had sent me on everything from battery powered to solar powered. But I use my my battery jumper for my car. It works okay. And then another thing happened, and this, maybe this is not what you're looking for, but as a sleep apnea patient, I made a mistake where my condo I live in, they termited tented the building, the entire building, for termites. I said, I got everything, except I realized I forgot my sleep apnea machine. And so I can promise you, in my particular case, 3 days without that machine got me going to 1-800-CPAP or whatever I bought. I had to buy one. That I went to my doctor, said, I need a prescription today. And I was stunned how much that 3 days without it impacted me. So be prepared as you go through your life facing sleep apnea. Be prepared for those type of events. I had a hurricane in one, and then my air in another. So it worked out fine. And then the battery, I travel with that quite a bit. And the only thing I would complain about, it's not too much, and I think Rick had helped me briefly last night, is that the seal in mine, and maybe this is a trivial item, but I'll deal with it offline, but the seal on my particular mask doesn't work, so maybe I need to be fit with a different one. I appreciate the opportunity for you all to hear my version of what sleep apnea does for me, or to me. Thank you.
Okay, 5 minutes, right? All right. I am the oldest of four. Coming up in high school, I was a music prodigy. I played piano, blew the trumpet. I was a short distance runner and a hurdler. And 2 months after my 18th birthday, my mother died from cancer and left me 3 younger siblings, 11, 10, and 5. And I had to figure out on the spot how to grow up really fast and do some very adult things and get it right. And so I was hit the bricks running. I worked all kinds of crazy hours. Then, when I hit 20, I met someone, I married. Things settled down, got a little easier. Had a daughter. Life was good for a while, but then at 28, I was a widow. He died from cancer. Back to a single mom, back to working crazy hours, back to working multiple jobs. Finally, I got the siblings out of the house and just had my daughter. When she was in high school, I put myself in school. I graduated from community college in May. She graduated from high school in June. And then she went on, thank you. She went on to college, and I went on to further my education. I came out with a master's in public administration with a couple of minors, and I went into social work. I used to jog every day, twice a day. I was into sports, playing softball, all that good stuff. And around 37, 38, I started having all these sinus problems. I kept having bouts of bronchitis. Okay, we thought maybe at the time, because I was on the college campus, that, kids less than hygienic, that maybe that was contributing to it. The doctor would tell me, kind of watch this, watch that. It got worse instead of better. By the time I was 43, in 2003, one doctor took a look down my throat and said, okay, you got something going on there, all that redness and everything. So they gave me an operation, took out the tonsils, took out the uvula. He said, okay, now you should be straight, go for it. I walked away thinking that was the end of the rainbow, and I went for the gusto. I got involved with a new position, okay, and out of nowhere, I started rapid weight gain. I couldn't breathe. I was falling asleep on the job. I was falling asleep behind the wheel. 6 months later, I sounded like Darth Vader, and I was in the worst physical condition that you could imagine. They had to let me go from my job. I lost my home, my car, everything. I ended up, instead of the social worker providing for others, I ended up being in the social system. Finally, to find out that the root of all the evil was sleep apnea. That was about 15 years ago. From sleep apnea, I went to degenerative bone disease, AFib, and congestive heart failure, along with IgA deficiency. This is a bear of a situation. I am no longer functional in a position to work. I live off a disability check that is less than $1,000 a month, and I live in supportive housing. It's a hell of an ending for a fighter and an ambitious person like myself. So I thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. And I plead with you people from the FDA to please do whatever it is you can and everything you can to see to it that no one else's life is ruined the way that mine has been. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Joelle Dubrow, born and raised in California, currently living in Los Angeles, California. I am your television producer and director. Type A personality. Work very hard. Normal work week is 60 to 80 hours a week. That's how I lived for 20, 30 years. Push, push, push. Live, live, live. Work hard. I was also physically fit. I danced as a leisure activity, took dance classes, took yoga classes, hiked, spent time outside, walked every day. I was skinny. I didn't meet any of the criteria for sleep apnea, and I had a horrible time sleeping. 3 and 4 weeks would go by and I wouldn't have slept. Insomnia was, the only way I could describe it for doctors. At the time, I had a Rolls-Royce health plan. They covered everything. We should all be so lucky to have that kind of a plan now. And I was sent from one doctor to another. In fact, here's my list. I was sent to a gynecologist because it was hormones, to an ear, nose, and throat because I wasn't breathing right, an allergist because I wasn't breathing right, a neurologist, there had to be something wrong with my brain, an endocrinologist. The endocrinologist's theory was that the brain was a gland and he was with UCLA, and he experimented with medication, and to a psychiatrist. I was given pills, pills, pills. And I was a compliant, obedient patient, so I would take whatever I was given for like 8, 9 months at a time until I realized I still wasn't sleeping. And I just kind of rebelled. I had enough with these doctors who wanted to treat me with more pills. I always woke up foggy-headed. I was miserable. I was more miserable after the medication than I was during it. The way it affected my life was pretty direct. I had employment issues. I was irritable, uncomfortable. There was a period of time I got fired constantly because I didn't know how bitchy I was. I didn't know how unprepared I was. All I know is that I was groggy, foggy-headed. I wasn't optimum. And I have to indicate I'm smart. You know, I have multiple degrees. I took all kinds of tests and proved that I'm a functioning normal person when I'm awake. Some tragic effects that I did have, at least personally tragic. Back in the 70s, I had the chance to direct 2 pilots. And if you know anything about women and directors back then in the 70s, that was unheard of. Women didn't direct pilots. Only now do you ever hear about that kind of thing, women being behind the camera and directing. I directed 2. I couldn't get through them. I was so tired, so exhausted, so cross-eyed. They didn't go. I could barely get them done, and they flopped, and the show never went, and I basically didn't get hired as a director thereafter. It was an end of my career as a director, and I continued as a producer and an executive in the entertainment industry. Not good. Couldn't fulfill my own life and what my goals were. I wasn't that journey of looking for doctors took over 20 years. From the time that I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 50s. Yeah, 50s, 60s? Yeah, whoa, back then. So I was diagnosed in 2006. And that was an amazing, interesting thing by itself. I was diagnosed when I was, every time I changed jobs, I also had to change health plans. This one, coincidentally, was an HMO. And they sent me home with some sort of a weird machine test, whatever, and decided I had sleep apnea. And then once I had it, they threw me into a room of 8 other people so I could get trained on my machine. I was the only woman in the room. Every one of us had a different machine, different mask. They played a video. I fell asleep during the instructional video. The people that were the DME people that were walking around that were supposed to wouldn't answer questions. And if they did answer it, they answered it to the men and not me. I had the only machine that did make sense. None of it. Of course, I didn't know. I didn't know where to turn, who to ask questions with. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years later that I found out that I was issued a model of machine that was no longer in manufacture, was out of date, sitting on some dusty shelf, and that the DME company, according to the reviews I eventually read online, was the worst DME company that, you know, because it didn't help anybody. I also learned later that I needed not just a CPAP machine, but I needed one with a humidifier. Then 2 years later, a machine that had a humidifier that was heated. All of this came in steps, 2-3 years apart from one another. I went through, just so that you could believe it, I've been diagnosed now and a compliant patient for 12 years. I went through 26 different mask styles. I kept a spreadsheet so I wouldn't duplicate it or wouldn't let a doctor duplicate it by accident. I went through 7, I'll call them doctors, practitioners who are experts in the field, who are the gatekeepers for getting the equipment, the sleep studies, whatever, blah, blah, blah. None of them were, in my opinion, particularly competent because I didn't present as a typical patient. My issues and needs were not typical. I'm now with my 7th specialist, Dr. Hashish Patel. Hello, if you're watching out there, Dr. Patel. I told him I'd be here today. He's the only one that actually knows what he was doing young guy, under 40. He had no fear of touching the equipment. Every other doctor would not touch the equipment, would not discuss the equipment with me, couldn't answer my questions. None of the DME people. And I was with, I think, 9 different DME companies. 9, because every time I changed a health plan, I had to, or when I was between, or you never know. Or I tried another one in hopes it would be better. 9 companies. None of these guys knew what they were doing. It wasn't until I was in a situation where the DME, which was a rotten DME company, but the technician also had sleep apnea. And he was a magic thing. Because he had sleep apnea, he told me all these tricks, all these things to do. He said, ask your doctor to give you a prescription for a specific machine with a specific name, blah, blah, blah. He taught me all these things, how to clean it differently, how to do better. It was radical. Everything changed from then. And I've been a compliant patient ever since, until recently. And I'm going through another episode. I've just been tested 2 weeks ago. And I don't know my status right now. Machine change, pressure change, who knows what's going to happen. And I would just like this group to realize how deeply this condition affects all of us. Our lives, our futures, our presents, our pasts. And we all have so much potential. We have so much potential. We could be giving more to this world. And I hope that you all join me in making this possibility change so that there's better treatment for sleep apnea for everyone.
Join me in thanking this panel of really compelling stories and witness to the effects of sleep apnea. While you make your way back to your seats so that we can all participate in the discussion session, Eric, let's do another poll. And this one will help us gauge the length of time that our patients and family members have been dealing with the kinds of experiences we just heard so poignantly described by our panel members. And okay, getting down. We've mentioned a couple times, Adam and I, the survey that we've been doing. We have over 5,000 responses to the survey already, and we'll keep that open through the end of June. One of the things, as you think about this question, how many years has sleep apnea first affected your life, seems pretty straightforward. But what the open text comments and what we just heard from the 5 patients is that's a tougher question to answer than you might think. Your diagnosis date for many is sort of a point in time. As San Juanita said, you've got the before and the after, but there's a whole part of the before that probably is clouded by the fact that sleep apnea was a part of that picture. And I think we can see from these results that we have a fairly long-lived experience of sleep apnea here with us today. And we'll keep that open for just another moment. Because so many of the stories that we just heard wrapped around the very arduous process of getting to diagnosis, once you take that step and seek the care, let's have our next poll about how long it took to get diagnosed. And even though these figures are slipping off the screen, we're capturing them. So they're a little bit fleeting in the room here, but we do have this data to go forward. And we'll be able to include it in the report that will be issued later this summer. From the experience we have with now the 5,000 plus survey responses, it seems that the process, once you've recognized the symptom, taken the action to pursue diagnosis, Joelle had a very long path to finally getting the correct diagnosis, but for others it seems that it can happen fairly swiftly, sometimes within weeks or months, as it did with San Juanita, but in other cases, obviously much longer. And now I want to make sure we open this up to the room. Since we've got some polling data here, we've got about 42% are within that first 2 years, and then the others spread across time. Often, and we heard this from Peter and from Adam and others, there is a dramatic event that may prompt you to seek medical care. Is there anyone who wasn't a member of the panel who would be willing to share something? It could be the health, in your own health. I'm going to go to Deborah. And we've got some mic runners, I think. Yeah, this is going to be a little Oprah-esque. No, for the purpose of the recording, it helps us to have the microphones.
Hi, my name is Debbie McCall, and I actually live with 3 sleep apnea patients. Yeah, honestly, it's always snoring at my house. But my husband was one of those holding his breath type. I knew it as soon as we started dating, he had sleep apnea, but it took me years to get him in for a sleep study because it didn't apply to him, of course. What actually got him to go into the sleep study is the night he picked me up and threw me across the room in his sleep. Because he had hurt me, then he decided to get the sleep study. Afterwards, once we got that treated, then we found out that he also had parasomnia, which was the violence, and then also somnambulism, which is walking in his sleep.
Anyone else want to offer either from a family member perspective or their own experience with something dramatic? We found that in about 5% in the survey, and some of the stories really quite remarkable, including Peter's brush in the car accident. For the caregivers, go ahead.
Not that I want to do this, being shy and all, but I guess I was a little lucky once. I had surgery. I live in Chicago. Dr. Michael Friedman has got to be one of the best in the country or world. And he basically said, you need surgery. And what they did exactly, I don't know. Something about the turbinates and something about deviated septum. So it was better after that, and I was using a CPAP machine, and that made life better. But there's all kinds of twists and turns and wrinkles. I mean, I'm still figuring out jigsaw pieces right now. I didn't know until recently I had parasomnia, which means that everybody else's REM is like muscles offline. Mine are online. I wake up and, I've just kicked a soccer ball or swatted off an opponent. And so that sounds to me like there's a sleep interruption, because then my brain is supplying a dream, which requires me to move, which requires me to breathe. So, as much as I'd like to be the poster boy for go get surgery and it's all good after that, it ain't. It can go on and on. I don't use CPAP right now, and the reason is because it sounded like Darth Vader. And my wife and I ended up buying literally the kind of airport baggage handler headsets rated to 31 that, so we wouldn't hear each other. And then, of course, every time you move your head on the pillow, you get a creaking sound from the never mind. You get the idea. It's like just, you think whack-a-mole. You think you've got it swatted down, and then there's another one over here, and it makes you feel weird, because it's like, well, does everybody have such an interesting life and all these like squirrely little things to keep track of? I mean, am I just like special? I get the whole, full-blown version. So surgery, I recommend, yes, CPAP can be good, but there's still other things. It may be that the best thing will be an oral device I'm being fitted for. That might end up being the best thing yet.
Paul brings up the range of treatments that people pursue, and that's come up in the panel also. We're going to spend the afternoon focused on that part of it and giving particular attention to some of the barriers we've already started to hear about. I'm going to just do a show of hands. We won't do a formal poll. How many people were sent home with a home sleep study before they spent a night in the toolbox? Who called it sleeping in the tool shed? Peter. How many people went home with a home sleep test as part of their diagnostic process? And then how many people were just sent straight to the overnight sleep lab? Yeah. Seems like on the survey response, it was just about half, or 86% actually had the overnight sleep test, and that was the way they got diagnosed. And it sounded like, at least from the panel's experience, that for many people, the diagnosis of sleep apnea was a complete surprise. It wasn't something they went in expecting they were going to hear. Show of hands for complete surprise. And the other thing that we heard a lot about is once you had that awareness in the before and the after period, all of these things start to go through your mind about, oh, that was connected, and this is why this feels this way, and here's why my performance on whatever cognitive or physical task is not up to what it used to be. How many have had that experience of feeling this sort of chain of events, and you can go back and maybe, like Joelle, play a movie reel in your head of all these things that are connected? Let's talk about that. Let's hear about some of the things that connect back kind of in the retrospective once you've got that awareness that your sleep is so disrupted and disturbed. Who wants to start? Celeste.
Well, I am fairly recently diagnosed. I've only known that I've had sleep apnea since 2015. But in the last several years, and only because I have felt the same way in the last few years as I felt for all of my life, that I realized that I have always had sleep apnea. I've always had some sort of sleep deprivation that changed the way a normal person would feel. I can tell you that I never thought I had a sleep disorder. I felt the way that I felt, but it was normal to feel the way that I felt because of the life that I lived. I was always busy, so yes, I'm always tired. It was normal. Never occurred to me at all that I might have had a sleep disorder. But now that I know that I do, and I'm finally understanding the way that these things are all connected. I understand that the way that I was feeling when I was a child and I was feeling like this was that I was experiencing migraines. Never knew that. As a matter of fact, I've just been diagnosed with migraines in the last couple of years. So I didn't even know that I had that. I didn't know that I had diabetes. I was diagnosed now several years ago, but I realize now that this was part of the problem. And I can tell you that my parents worked for the city. We have always had good health care. I have always seen doctors and dentists and done the things that I was supposed to do. I was a compliant patient, and I was never diagnosed properly. Never. I was never asked if I was ever tired because I was always doing things. I was involved in things. I was a very active child. I was involved in sports, and I was always the leader of something. I was involved in things in my community. I was always the head of something at my church. It was normal to be tired. I didn't realize that I was tired. To be honest with you, I never knew that I was tired. I slept 4 hours a day. There were long periods of time where I only slept 4 hours a day, but I never felt any differently, and so I never knew that I was tired. This was my normal. This was my normal. So this is how you sleep. This is how you feel when you get enough sleep. And enough sleep for me was 4 hours a day, because when I got 6, because I'm a woman, and that's a whole other thing, because we each have an S on our chest, don't let anyone tell you anything differently. And so when you have several things going on, for women, you have several things going on at the same time. And so just in case those of you who did not realize that we don't get to just sit and watch television. If we're sitting in front of the television, there are clothes in the washing machine and a pot on the stove. Because if you're not doing 3 things at once, come on now, if you're not doing 3 things at once, you are lazy. There is a problem. So You're always doing something. Your hands are involved in something. Your mind is involved in something. I didn't know that I had migraines. I just knew that there were periods of time that I called fall down or lie down. I didn't know that it was connected to anything medical, honestly. I just figured this is just the way that people feel when you do the things that we do. So, periodically you got to sit down or you'll fall down. Because that was just a feeling that came over you after a while. I know now that it's a migraine because after a while I would either lie down or fall down. I understand now that I have diabetes, and because I was not diagnosed properly and I was never educated properly, it progressed because I didn't do the things I needed to do, and so now I take injections. I have issues with my vision. I developed cataracts and had the cataracts removed, and on the suggestion of my eye physician, I had these lenses implanted. And now I have injections in my eye once every 6 weeks. One thing connected to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Things not being properly diagnosed and creating other problems later on. Thank you.
That was really... Celeste's story brings up some data that we've gathered from our survey, and in the 2,500 responses that are most similar to at least the group that has participated in the last poll of being maybe longer lived experience with this condition, a bit older, longer term since diagnosis, we found that the rates of high blood pressure in that population of 2,500 was about 56% of the people said they had high blood pressure, and that compares with a US estimate of about a third, so much higher. Diabetes was 23% in that group compared to the national estimate for 9%. For GERD, the reflux symptoms, we had 33% of the sample had GERD, and that's about twice what the US population is. And Adam started us off with a reference to major depression being in this population 14%, while in the US as a whole it's slightly under 10%. So much higher rates of all kinds of things that Dr. Burson brought up in her slides. And with all of these layered complexity, Eugenia's story of how one thing just led to this very fast cascade of losing a career, life just falling apart from out from under you. What are some of the other changes of a life derailed by this, or by not knowing what it was, but experiencing all of the symptoms? I think many of us who consider ourselves to be healthy know what it's like to miss a night of sleep, or a couple nights of sleep, or a week when we're under high stress. But years and years of not sleeping well, as Shelley said, your blood is being returned to your body in a purple state, not a red state, and it causes chronic wear and tear on your system. Anybody want to share maybe some of the things, the symptoms they've experienced as a result of this? Yes, please.
So I don't have sleep apnea. I have relatives with sleep apnea, but I'm actually here for Narcolepsy Network because we have people who fall in the category of having sleep apnea and narcolepsy. Sleep tests for sleep apnea don't necessarily pick up on narcolepsy, particularly the home ones. So we have people who have been diagnosed with one or the other, and they have been good, compliant patients who have, taken their medications or used their CPAP, and they're still tired, and they're still having trouble driving, and they're still having trouble in school. I have narcolepsy. I was diagnosed as a teenager in school, so that's the area I always feel when we see kids who are losing years. There has started to be more recognition of narcolepsy as an adolescent disease, but sleep apnea is something that happens to older adult men. But we have kids who have sleep apnea and narcolepsy. And if you diagnose one and treat one, you're only hitting part of the problem. And so the kid is still falling asleep in school. And they're still failing a grade. They're still sleeping through Algebra 1, and if you sleep through Algebra 1, all the rest of your math classes are harder. So all of that leads to complications, to a life potential that is not fulfilled. And we need to get better at diagnosing the entire spectrum of the problem, whether that is the comorbidity of diabetes and sleep apnea or narcolepsy and sleep apnea. We need to get better tests for kids. We need to get better at the sleep lab, because as somebody said, it's like sleeping in a tool shed. Nobody sleeps well in a sleep lab. Nobody sleeps well during an overnight sleep study. That's why they've started trying to do home sleep studies, but home sleep studies don't pick up on REM abnormalities very well. We need better technology. We need to not have that goop in your hair. I had the electrodes on your head. I had a full-fledged EEG the day before homecoming in 9th grade. Let me tell you, as a 14-year-old girl, the last thing I wanted to be dealing with right before my first homecoming dance was having all that goop on my head. Oh, it's the 21st century, and as one of our medical advisory board members said, we're still using 1980s technology in our sleep labs. We need to get better at having devices, particularly for kids, that pick up on stuff. And we need devices that are tested on kids too, and devices that help pick up women, because the default in the medical community is, men, adult men. And we need to get better at that so that people aren't losing years of their lives. One final comment on mine. I was in denial about the sleep issues even as I was falling asleep on the pediatric neurologist's table, and I was telling him I had no sleep issues. It was the cataplexy that got me into the doctor's office, because tripping, dropping things, okay, that was abnormal. But I did have sleep issues. One of the things I used to justify it to myself was, well, Granddaddy is always resting his eyes. That was normal. Because when you put my grandfather in a lazy boy, he would fall asleep. But Granddaddy was always busy. He'd help turn companies around, and he was always hardworking, and he did woodworking, and he had half a dozen things going on. So obviously he didn't have any sleep issues. But as long as I can remember, if you sat him in a comfortable chair, he'd fall asleep even in the middle of conversation. He's in his mid-80s now, and a couple of years ago, he was diagnosed with sleep apnea. Go figure. So we need to get better at diagnosing everybody, but particularly with the comorbid conditions. Thanks.
Thank you. Let's talk about some of those symptoms that might be prevalent in this. Eric, if we could have poll number 5 up there. Maybe the next one. Yeah, there we go. And we're asking you to let us know the top 1 or 2 symptoms that are severe or moderate impact. And by severe, we mean it's a major limitation on your life, and a moderate impact would be some limitation on your life. So think about what are the 1 or 2 things that most impact your daily life. Give that a minute for people to participate. All right, good. So it's no surprise that a condition that is sort of centered on sleep and poor sleep, that fatigue, daytime sleepiness, unrefreshing sleep often shows up in this list when we did the longer list on the survey as being the most highly ranked of the disabling symptoms. And the panel met last night for dinner, and we were talking about the difference between fatigue and daytime sleepiness, and can you really tell the difference between those things? And I think people who live with chronically fatiguing condition have all sorts of words and terms they come up with, like tired but wired. I'm sleepy, no, I'm bone tired, I'm exhausted. All of those things might sound the same to a healthy population, but they're very distinct constructs when you're dealing with this, and you have to come up with different labels to sort of differentiate between how those things feel. Let's talk about fatigue. It's a tough thing to measure. At almost all of these patient-focused drug development meetings, we spend a lot of time hearing about how fatigue is such a disabling element of everything from different types of cancer to HIV to diabetes to sickle cell disease. It's tough. It's a tough part of most illness. It's a thing you take for granted when you're well, for sure. Who wants to share the impact of the fatigue or the daytime sleepiness? We heard a lot of that from the panel, but I invite others to weigh in as well.
So, as a child, I was always the poster boy of why can't you get out of bed? Why are you so smart but you can't follow through? And that, I never understood it. It was my normal. And then as I got into my professional life and my work life, it was the same thing. Joelle mentioned talking about directing pilots in the 70s. I directed a feature film in my young 20s, and a week into production, 18-hour days, my brain shut off. And there was no going back. There was no resuscitating it. And it's, fatigue is, the way I explain it is as adults, we burn through our adrenals. So that when I'm tired, even as a 100% compliant patient, I can never, I can go right now up to my room, put on a mask, and be asleep within 5-10 minutes. And I had a great night's sleep last night. I don't have the adrenals, whereas children will present sort of as hyperactive. Children still have their adrenals. So at 4 or 5 o'clock, or that sundown time, that witching hour, that child who's bouncing off the walls or who's climbing on the ceiling, it really presents the reverse. And it's not tired, it's not fatigue, but that child is exhausted. We all know it. We know that child needs a nap. We know that child needs to go to sleep. But how do you get them down? So it's an amazing evolution from as a child through my teens. I remember starting to drink coffee. By the time I was 13 on the way to school, I'd be in carpool. I'd be snorting myself awake 4 or 5 times by the time I got to school. It was actually interesting. My mother used to say, even if I went to school late, she'd still want me to go and do an after-school activity or a soccer or an event because she knew that the athleticism would help with the anxiety. We never termed it anxiety. She just knew that if I didn't get my yayas out, I was an insane child to deal with when I got home at night. So fatigue is just rampant in all walks of life. It doesn't discriminate. Like I said earlier, I've wrecked more cars than I can count. In hindsight, thank God I never hurt anyone. I didn't hurt myself. But in retrospect, there was no doubt that I was walking through life as a zombie, and I had no idea. And, I had the aha moment when I did get a good night's sleep, what it was like. But I could tell you it's not a simple, quick little fix. It's took, I'm now 10 years into my therapy, and I'm still learning, and that's a scary thing. So.
Yeah, these fatiguing symptoms seem to persist even in the patients who feel like they are well treated with CPAP. And I think that's something we're just now beginning to understand. Shelley, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add something. I often confuse the definitions of fatigue and sleepiness, and it's really hard to know what the difference is. And so I actually looked them both up because I thought it might come up. And I know that a lot of the new drugs or things that narcoleptics are on are meant to treat excessive daytime sleepiness. And so just to get the difference, and again, I looked this one up, but sleepiness difficulty in maintaining the wakeful state so that the person falls asleep if not kept actively aroused. It's not simply physical tiredness or listlessness. So this is like an urge that you cannot fight. And that's very different from how they define fatigue. So and fatigue, they said extreme tiredness, typically resulting from mental or physical exertion or illness. Tiredness, weariness, drowsiness, exhaustion, languor, lethargy. So it seems as if it's like a physical urge that you can't fight to be sleepy. And so I thought that distinction was important because I wonder in your questionnaire whether people actually knew the difference and they just answered it, yeah, I'm sleepy and I'm tired and I'm fatigued. So I would question your result there. Because I can't even always keep it straight.
Yeah, they track very closely.
Correct.
So it suggests that people are maybe not distinguishing in the way that they answered the survey.
But pharma is apparently
Absolutely.
dealing with excessive daytime sleepiness, which is that urge to have to fall asleep, which leads you to believe that the mechanism of action is probably somewhere with the
Different.
whole REM thing.
Right.
So that's not my
We've got
expertise.
somebody in the back there who wants to join in.
Here.
Yeah.
Since it came up, people with narcolepsy generally say that your results for fatigue and daytime sleepiness for people with a sleep apnea, it tracks the consistency of the fatigue and the sleepiness. It tracks pretty closely with some of the stuff we hear from people with narcolepsy. We don't distinguish well between those two things either, and I think it is a point that the drugs treat excessive daytime sleepiness, but they don't necessarily touch the fatigue. And so we have people who are on high doses of wake-promoting substances, and they're still saying, I'm exhausted. So obviously that's something that the pharmacological industry needs to take a closer look at. Because if the population high narcoleptic here for whom the drug is designed are still saying that we've got tiredness, well, obviously it's not, there's unmet needs.
Great. We've got somebody in the back who would like to join in.
I wanted to add an experience of mine relative to that list. So while I'm a patient with sleep apnea and could complain about all of those things, but I would elaborate that for me, one of the major underlying anxieties is the realization that the sleep apnea is causing other problems for me. You know, the hypoxia for the brain, the effect on the cardiovascular system. It creates a frustration. I've tried CPAP and mandibular advancement devices and positional therapies, and I keep trying. And it doesn't seem to work. So it's frustrating to realize not just that I'm tired, but that I'm hurting myself each night by having these frequent apneic episodes.
Thank you. Let's look at some of the other symptoms. We've talked about fatigue and daytime sleepiness. Coming up very high in this particular setting are the difficulties with cognitive issues, thinking, concentrating, memory. And we heard from Dr. Burson why that might be the case. Our brain is not getting the full benefit of the restful sleep where all of the repair happens. And San Juanita talked about the impact on her law practice and these symptoms coming on in the setting of trying to help a client and not only falling asleep, but not having the ability to recall. What are some of the other cognitive issues that come up for people, either while they're doing well with their treatment or maybe beforehand? Erin.
Hi. I know for me, the difficulty with sort of thinking and cognition and particularly memory was one of the scariest aspects of sleep apnea. When I started developing other symptoms of sleep apnea, I really had difficulty recalling words. I would be very forgetful about bringing things with me, or my kids would ask me to do something with them or help them with something. And, you know, if I didn't do it immediately, I would forget that they'd asked about it. So it was really scary because, you know, I was a very academic person, and I did a lot of very cerebral work at my job. And so that was a very, very difficult thing to realize. I was losing some of the cognitive ability I had had before. And my therapy has really helped me with that. But I think that's just a terrifying aspect of this, that, you know, your short-term memory just starts to go, and you can't concentrate the way that you used to or recall words the way you used to. So that was one of the things that really prompted me to seek out treatment.
Great, thank you for that. We saw a lot of comments in the open text in the survey about the impact on the ability to make decisions and to synthesize information in a way where you felt confident that you could make a decision in a you know, appropriate way. Anyone else want to share some of the cognitive impacts, either short-term or over time? Okay. Let's think about, there are a few other things that we didn't include on this list that are part of the survey questionnaire. How about pain? We don't think of pain and sleep apnea going together, but certainly having spent the evening with a number of you, heard that come up time and again. And for you, Eugenia, that, yeah. You want to share a little bit about that?
It's the situation with the sleep apnea. I don't know, back when I was 26 years old, I was in a car accident, and when I got checked out afterwards, they told me that I had degenerative bone disease. And, you know, being the athletic person that I was like, okay, so what's the point? And they said, well, it basically means your bones are breaking down, and it's going to be painful, and, you know, and time goes by, you're going to have arthritis and whatever else, and, you know, so I said, I'll worry about it when I get there. But, you know, for years, I was active, as I said, okay, had very little problem, every now and again, you know, lower back pain, okay. Pregnancy gave me more trouble than anything else. I was fine, but then when the sleep apnea got involved, it basically crippled me. You know, that's the long and the short of it. The pain is what cripples you, okay? My knees, my whole spine at this point is affected. It's in my shoulder. I feel it now in my hands and my wrists. And, you know, that kind of thing from day to day. You know, I went from, like I said, jogging and playing softball and, you know, all of that to, you know, a good day for me now is today. You saw me, I haven't walked upstairs in over 2 years. First of all, 2 days ago, I was in a wheelchair. I mean, that's the reality of life. And believe you me, when I get back to New York, I will probably be prostrate for a week. That's
Like today,
oh yeah,
right?
for all of this little rowdy stuff you see me doing. Okay. I'm gonna pay for it in spades, and it was worth it, but that's the reality of it. The pain sometimes is astronomical. Okay, and I think back about, you know, when I was a kid and my grandmother and how she used to rock, rubbing her knees, you know, and she'd say, don't get old, okay? And now I find myself sitting watching TV or whatever, and I'm rocking and rubbing my knees, okay? That's the reality of it. It's a reality. It's debilitating and it's disheartening, because when you're an active person and you want to be active, to be sidelined. I understand little kids now that I knew when I was little, and why they always look sad to watch the rest of us playing sports, and they had something wrong that they couldn't join us, because now I'm that kid.
Anybody else want to speak to pain, either the perception of pain being amplified because of sleep apnea or the pain itself?
Love to speak about pain. I literally had a bilateral disc herniation when my daughter was about 1, so it was about 6 months into my treatment. If I were to show you the MRI, I shouldn't even be walking right now. I was on more different pharmaceuticals, both prescribed and self-medicating, than I can count over a long period of time. The sleep was so bad that my sympathetic nervous system was just firing at all different hours of the night, all different hours of the day, and I was feeling sensations that they were telling me that was not there. Bottom line is, once I finally got hold of my sleep and treating it the right way, my so-called fibromyalgia, my chronic pain, disappeared. And that is not known amongst a lot of people right now. Once the sleep was solidified and stabilized, the body reset. And what I needed to do as far as medication or management of it was just night and day. I actually had a very good, young trained neurosurgeon at the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis who looked at me and says, listen, there is no doubt you are a candidate for artificial replacement surgery in your neck for a disc, but let me tell you something. What you've got going on is something else. He goes, I can go fix your neck, but that's not going to solve what's going on in your head. So he said, when you go back out to California, you start over, you get off the meds, and you rule out one variable at a time. So my words of wisdom, advice is that for a lot of us sleep apnea patients, it's so hard for us to figure out what the variable it is that we need to manage when it comes to the pain, when it comes to our work life. You have to look at one variable at a time and figure out if that's a positive for you, a negative, or neutral. If you try to change too many things, you'll never get a hold of what that one thing is. I know I could say it more eloquently, but I hope that helps explain sort of where I've learned how to manage my pain and issues of that nature.
Great. We're going to come back to management issues after we take a break for lunch, which we're just about ready to do. I know that there is a lot left to say, and as I started in the morning, it's hard to tease this complicated set of symptoms and treatments and how they interrelate and comorbid conditions and all of the many manifestations apart into two neat buckets. So we'll continue some of the dialogue that we've started this morning when we come back after lunch and really focus in on the way that sleep apnea is treated kind of across the different disciplines that Shelley outlined for us. She's going to give us a short overview of the different ways and approaches to treating sleep apnea, and then all of you are going to weigh in with your vast experience and the number of things that you've tried in terms of managing your condition.